Hi, my name is Steve and I'm from Crossways Community. Crossways is a Christian mental health charity in Tunbridge Wells, and in this session we're going to look at stress, what it is, and some tips on how to manage it better. If this video is used in a class or group setting, there are some ground rules that it's important that we all try to follow. Keep what's said to this group. Don't make assumptions about other people. It's important that you seek help if you need it and encourage others to do so as well. You don't have to share, but you might find it helpful to share with a trusted adult or friend. Listen to others. Don't be judgmental. I want you to think whether stress is a good thing or not. Have a think for a few seconds. You might think that's an odd question, but during this session we're going to look at what stress is, why it might be a good thing at times, why it can be a bad thing, and most importantly, what we can do to help ourselves cope with it. One of the big issues with stress is how we see it. Take a look at this picture. The guy kneeling down is Julian Beaver, and he has just drawn the chalk picture on the floor. I want you to imagine you were the guy in the pale blue shirt at the top of the screen. If he were to walk forwards, what would happen to him? It looks like he would fall to his death. After all, we can see that Julian Beaver is kneeling on top of a tall building, and we can see a small blue bird flying below him. But we know it's an illusion. However, our brains are stuck between seeing a 3D image and knowing that it's a flat drawing. When our brains see the world, it makes assumptions. Most of the time these are correct and helpful, but occasionally they're wrong. Knowing where these assumptions are wrong can help us cope better with stress. Before we move on, an interesting feature of this drawing. The table and chairs to the right of the drawing are the table and chairs to the right of the picture, with the guy walking his bike in front of it. To the bottom right of the bluebird in the drawing is a small scene. That's a drawing of what we're looking at now. Julian Beaver has drawn the scene around him on the floor next to him. If you're not convinced that our brains can make the wrong assumptions at times, here's another example. On the screen is a chessboard with two marked squares. If I were to move the square with B on it and place it on the square with A on it, would it be lighter, darker, or the same? Have a think for a second. Lighter, darker, or the same? Here's a solution. In this animation, I'm cutting and pasting square with B on it until it's on top of the square with A on it. It's a clever trick devised by Edward Adelson. We understand what a chessboard looks like, so we make assumptions. The square with B on it has dark squares around it, the square with A light squares around it, so they look different, but in fact they're the same. Well done if you got that right, but most people don't. We've assumed that the green cylinder is casting a shadow, and in the same way, our brains know that a plain floor or carpet, part lit by sunlight and part in shadow, is also the same, even though the part in shadow looks darker. So in this example, we think square B is in shadow even though the only light is from your screen. Back in 2013, a survey showed that those students who were stressed about doing their GCSEs got 1.5 grades, or 3 points on our current system, lower than their peers. They tested them at the age of 11 and compared them at 16, so they did rule out other things that might be an issue. They weren't any less bright, but they were less able to cope. Hence, being better prepared will help you get better exam results. It also helps if you revise, but thankfully that's someone else's job to tell you that. So what are the effects of too much stress on us? Stress causes the body to produce chemicals that fire up the muscles ready for action. This is fine for short periods of time, but can cause muscle pain and headaches. Our digestion system slows down, that butterfly feeling in our stomach, and our heart rate and breathing to increase. After a while, it can affect our immune system. Mentally, we become less patient with people. We feel out of control, panicky, depressed. We can become obsessive over small things and lose confidence. Because we're finding it hard to cope and think clearly, we can become accident prone. The stress hormone cortisol, when it shuts down our digestion system, means that we lose our appetite. We're also likely not to be sleeping well and may have constant racing thoughts. All this adds up to us thinking and feeling in a pretty bad way. Stress affects so much of our bodily and mental functions. Before we start, let me just point out that this isn't a real event. Just wanted you to be reassured by that. So why have stress at all? If there was a pill to remove it permanently, wouldn't this be a good thing? Imagine you're the person taking this picture. 10 out of 10 for taking the perfect Instagram picture, but I'm not sure how long you'd live to enjoy the likes. Our bodies are designed to cope with threats. Our brain's main function is to keep us alive for as long as possible. Hence, when it senses a threat, even before you thought about, wow, what a big dinosaur, your brain has kicked into action. It's released hormones to prime your muscles for action and diverted energy away from less important tasks like digesting food to improve your readiness. Your mind will kick into one of 4 options to react to the stress. These are automatic and you don't really have to think about them. They are fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. The first one, fight. Do you choose to take on the dinosaur and try and beat it? Second one, flight. Do you, like these people here, try and run away? Or you might consider freeze. We feel so overwhelmed that we're just rooted to the spot. This isn't always a bad thing. Some animals are very good at sensing movement. Staying still can be an advantage. Or perhaps you choose fawn. A little devious possibly, but what if we could reason with the dinosaur, appeal to its better nature, or possibly grab one of our nearby friends and offer him instead as a tasty morsel? So here we have our 4 standard responses: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. I think it's fair to say that even with lockdown, there are precious few dinosaurs running around Tunbridge Wells, but our brains are still acting that dangerous risks are still possible. So there is a value to stress. There's a 5th F that I've not talked about, foresight. One of the best ways to deal with stress is to either avoid it or be prepared in advance to deal with it. Imagine you heard that dinosaurs were rampaging through the centre of town. Not going to look, tempting thought that would be, might be a good way of avoiding stress. We're going to look at a stress versus performance bell curve. Performance along the Y or side axis and stress along the X or bottom axis. Imagine it's summer and there's no lockdown. If we've nothing to do, we can choose to spend all our days sitting around or possibly staying in bed. With very little stress, we can be very inactive and laid back, which occasionally is nice, but might get a bit boring after a while. With a bit more stress, we are motivated to do things. We get tired, but we can rest and feel refreshed. This is optimum stress. With a bit more stress, we start to become overwhelmed. We soon get tired, but even after resting, we don't feel fully recovered. Our performance can get worse. We can maintain this for a while, but we're feeling uncomfortable. If we continue to get stressed, we start feeling anxious and irritable, getting angry with our friends and family, and if it continues to the extreme, we have a breakdown and we burn out. Thankfully, this is very rare. The ideal is to keep to the central orange areas. The occasional slack day and the occasional manic day isn't a problem, but we need to keep it under control. Let's think of an example before we move on. Imagine it's a hot day and you're feeling really thirsty, so you drink 3 pints of cold water just before you're going on a long motorway journey. Initially you're going to feel fine, but after a while, nature will take its course. You'll be desperate to go to the loo. Your body will be feeling stress and you'll want to stop at a service station. If you can get to one soon, then that's great, but the longer the wait, the greater the stress, and to the point where it becomes all-consuming. We become irritable and it's the only thing we can think about. Then a service station appears, you stop, and all is well. Imagine the issue isn't about finding a toilet for a few brief minutes, but this feeling of all-consuming stress was about life issues that went on for days on end. Hopefully you can see how potentially damaging stress can be if it's not handled carefully. Top tip. As we can see, some stress is good and can be very useful in getting us motivated. It's only when it becomes too much stress that it becomes bad. We're going to look at another way of understanding how stress affects us and how we can better manage it. As we go through life, we each face different external demands. Tigers coming into our rooms, school and teachers, our parents, our friends, and situations where life just gives us a hard time, like our dog eating our homework. Some of these will be common to a lot of us, but our own circumstances will be unique to us. We can't always avoid these things, but how we react to each of them is our own internal response. We look at what is happening around us, and our brains make an assessment as to how to think and feel about it. That might be doubt and fear, guilt, excitement, FOMO, love and happiness, etc. And each of our responses might be different to other people's, even to the same experience. Often it's not the external demand that is the issue, but how we see it. Some people really love school, some people don't. It isn't the school that's the issue quite often, but how we actually view it. Our internal response might be automatic, but we can choose to make an internal assessment of the situation. This is where we can weigh up how we feel about something. A quick question. What is the difference between when we feel excited, i.e. going on a roller coaster, and when we might be anxious, such as when we're about to sit an exam? Let's look at some of the symptoms. Racing heart, twisting stomach, sweating skin, and dry mouth. Now look at some of the symptoms about when we're about to sit an exam. Racing heart, twisting stomach, sweating skin, and dry mouth. They're both the same. A clever trick that's been shown to work is because our brains can't tell them apart. If you're about to do something that you're nervous about, tell yourself that you're actually excited about it. This will fool the brain into thinking better about it. Here's a quote. It's better to be afraid, excited and thinking the best, than to be scared, worried and expecting the worst. In the next video, Sarah and Florence are going to demonstrate what it's like to be stressed and anticipating a stressful event.
So this morning we're going to look at what actually happens when stress affects our bodies. When we go through something that we find, or what we call stressful, what are the physical symptoms? Sarah and Florence have been asked to blow up a balloon in the quickest time possible. This will put them on the spot and trigger symptoms of stress. Well, that was easy. So now Florence has to do a stage harder. This time she has to hold the balloon blindfolded. And what she is told that there is a pin about to burst the balloon and she's got to hold her nerve. Florence, so how did you feel? It was terrifying, wasn't it, when that pin came along? What were the stress symptoms that your body went through?
I was shaking, my pulse rate went up, I had an adrenaline rush, I felt hotter and I wanted to run away.
Florence is experiencing all the classic signs of stress. Her body has prepared her for what is to come, enabling her to react, to fight or to flee. This is so useful when we're about to do an exam, when speaking in public, or jumping out of the way of danger.
As we saw in the video, the stress of anticipation whilst holding the balloon was worse than the temporary discomfort of when the balloon burst. Imagine how Florence would have felt if she'd held the balloon for a few minutes. We can build up in our heads a whole picture of what might happen. So when it comes to anticipating stress, how realistic are our fears? A study was done comparing people's fears of what they thought might happen with the later follow-up where they described what did happen. 85% found that what they feared didn't turn out to be the case. A further 12% found that what they were dreading turned out to be much better than expected, or that they learned valuable lessons from it for the future. Only in 3% of cases did what they feared turn out to be mostly the case. So in 97% of the situations, what was feared either didn't happen or was much better than expected. So if you're dreading something in the future, remember 97%. It's probably not going to happen as badly as you think. So here's a top tip you might find helpful. Worrying about an event can be worse than the event itself. One of the things we'd like you to take away from this session is that even though we can't always control what external demands come our way and our initial internal responses, as we have just seen with a roller coaster ride, we can choose how we react in our internal assessment. We can develop and build our resilience by planning well. So if you have a difficult issue coming up, come up with ideas how you might think differently about it. Sometimes you may need to ask for help from family and trusted friends. If you plan well, I can't guarantee that you will go through life with a sense of zen-like calm, but it might just be a little more bearable. So being organised can help you feel less stressed. In the next two videos, we'll see a demonstration of that. In the first video, our volunteer is given items to carry without any planning, and she's been told not to drop them. Each item represents an activity that she has to do that day. In the second video, Sarah has the same amount of boxes, but instead she thinks ahead about how she could arrange them. The difference? The same amount of activities, but with a bit of thought about planning well, they are more manageable. It won't solve every problem, but it can make things a little easier. So what does it look like to plan well? Here are some questions you might want to ask yourself. Is it too small a thing to think about? Somewhere out of Mongolia, a sheep farmer has just stubbed his toe. For him it's a big issue as it hurts quite a lot, but it might not be something that we need to concern ourselves with. Is it urgent? Is it important? These are often confused. Homework is always important, but becomes more urgent the longer we leave it. If it was due in 5 minutes ago, it's very urgent. If we're constantly leaving things that we're bombarded with urgent demands, we're not going to feel in control. Can I leave it till later? I'm sure some of you have planned for your retirement. It's a very important thing to do. For those who might not have done, it's something that can be left until you've started work. Can I do something small now to make it easier for the future? Exam revision is much easier if you start early and make sure you understand the topics as you go along. Do I need help from another? We all need help at times, and it's important to realise that help is available. So if you need help, always make the effort to ask for it. Here are some top tips. We may need to change the way we see the world. Think back to that Julian Beaver chalk drawing. When we look at the world, we make assumptions about it. Often this will be correct, but not always. We may need to think differently. Our brains are used to responding to situations automatically. We may need to consider whether this is always the best way. If we look at a situation in a different way, we may feel more in control. We may need to plan differently. Resilience is all about being able to cope with life's pressures. This doesn't come automatically. We may need to plan in a better way. So let's recap. Our brains make assumptions about the world. Every time we sit on a chair, we don't test it to see if it holds our weight. They normally do, so we take it for granted. But sometimes those assumptions are wrong, and similarly, sometimes our assumptions about things that we find stressful are wrong. Some stress is good to get us motivated, but too much stress should be avoided. We might not be able to control what comes our way, but if we take some responsibility for our lives, and with a bit of planning, we might be able to manage our circumstances a bit better. We're going to look at a different model to help us understand stress. As we grow up, we absorb basic rules that we should or should not do to make sense of life. Here are a few of mine. Don't run with scissors. I've never known anyone who has been hurt by someone else running with scissors, but I still have this in my head. When crossing the road, look left and right. Eat your vegetables or you don't get any pudding. Don't get distracted by the internet if you have work to do. Stranger danger. We called it something similar when I was growing up. Don't eat with your mouth full. Sometimes we can be a bit hypocritical. With all of these, I don't mind if I occasionally don't follow the rules, but I might get annoyed if I saw someone else not following them. Hence we might have rules we expect everyone else, i.e. the world, to live by, and rules we should live by ourselves. Our internal rules are only part of it. Beyond us the world exists, and I'll use two different ideas. How the world is, which I will call reality, i.e. how everyone else would see the situation, and how it appears to us, what we see. Often these will be the same thing, but think back to the Julian Beaver chalk drawing. Sometimes what we imagine things to be aren't always what's really going on. I'll try and explain them as I go along. As long as the world is or appears to be the same as our internal rules say it should be, we feel calm. If the world isn't as we think it should be, the difference is the stress we feel. The greater the difference, the greater the stress. Resilience is therefore the ability to cope and adapt with reality, or our perception of it, and how it differs from the rules say it should be. Don't worry if this doesn't make much sense now. I'll give a couple of examples in a minute. An example. Imagine if a tiger were to walk into your room. I would guess I would be right in thinking that most people have a rule that says tigers are dangerous and should be avoided. The reality is that if there is a tiger in the room, then that is a fact. But we only become stressed when we know there is a tiger in the room, so if we haven't seen it, we're still feeling calm. The reality of the tiger and the perception of it, i.e. if we've seen it or not, can be different. So if we haven't checked that there is a tiger in the room, now might be a good time. So the tiger causes stress, and we have several options to respond to that. I'll go through each one in turn. Number 1. Automatic mode. Our brains are normally very good at keeping us safe, and it chooses one of 4 ways to react we saw earlier: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. I'll explain each one of these in turn. We learn over the years how to react to situations, but sometimes the brain makes mistakes, and we get stressed over things we shouldn't. So the good point is, it's quick. The bad point is, if our instinctive reaction is unhelpful, we'll end up doing the same thing over and over again. The second option is to try and force a reality to change. The tiger is still in the room, but rather than reacting instinctively, we choose to try and force it to be less dangerous. Tigers are dangerous, but little kittens tend not to be. So if we could get the tiger to behave like a little kitten, then we're okay. This isn't as silly an option as you might think. The good point is, we might feel less stressed, and sometimes social justice requires us not to accept life as it is. Think Greta Thunberg. The bad point is that tigers often don't want to be kittens. We need to pick our battles carefully and don't try to change things that are beyond us. The third option is to actively change our perception. Instead of seeing a tiger, we tell ourselves that it really is a cute kitten. The tiger hasn't changed, but we pretend that it has. We sometimes hope that if we ignore a problem, it will go away on its own. The good point is that we're less stressed as we see the world as we want it to be. The bad point is it doesn't actually change reality. The tiger still is a tiger. The final choice is to accept reality as it is. Consider our options and learn how to adapt. We accept the reality of the tiger and learn how to manage the tiger safely. The good point is we learn how to be more confident and resilient. The bad point is this takes time and practice, and some problems might be beyond us at first, so we might need some help. Let's look at a more practical example: exams. Some people love them, not many, but a lot of people feel uncomfortable with them. So if you're one of those who struggle with exams, see which of the options best fits how you see them, and think of things you might want to change. Back to the automatic mode, but this time we'll consider each of the 4 options in turn. Fight. Here we get angry with being forced to do exams. How dare they make us do exams? Don't they realise what we've had to go through? But with hundreds of thousands of people taking exams every year, only a small number get special treatment for extenuating circumstances. For all their flaws, exams are how society tests that you've learnt something. So the good point is that it's good to be passionate about things, but in reality, the bad point is that it doesn't really change anything. You either do the exam or you don't. Flight. Here we pretend that they're not going to happen. Who knows, they might just go away. Of course, most of the time they don't. If you do really badly in your GCSEs, there's always retests, but this postpones the problem for another day. Facing up to stress and learning to cope with it will be helpful throughout your life. You spend all that time in school, it will be good if you can show it was worthwhile. Good point. There are not many with this one. During a pandemic they might be cancelled, but then your teacher will have to assess you on your work record you've done so far, and if you've not made any effort, they can't really justify you getting a good grade. The bad point: if the exams are still on, avoiding thinking about them doesn't really change things. The next one is freeze. This is quite common. You do all the revision, but when you turn the exam paper over, you panic and everything goes blank. It feels like the ground is about to swallow you up. The good point is, well, there are no good ones with this one. If you recognise this in yourself, before you turn the paper over, give yourselves a few minutes. Practice some deep breathing techniques and ways just to calm yourself down. This helps the body to reduce the stress-producing hormones and help you think more clearly. Try and spot an easy question to start you off, and this will just give yourself a bit more confidence. The bad point is, well, it's not a good feeling, is it? The next one is fawn. This might seem an odd one. Fawn means to excessively try and please people, such as telling your parents how wonderful they are, just so that they will give you extra pocket money. It will feel artificial. It's not just about being nice to people. You should always try and be nice to everyone. It's about being nice so that they think better of us. The stress comes from trying to please other people, our parents, our teachers, etc., by doing well on the exams. It's good that other people want you to do well, but if you feel your self-worth only comes from doing well, then that isn't healthy. The good point is, wanting your parents and teachers to think better isn't a bad thing, and they will want you to do well, and it may mean you get good results, but you'd want to do well for yourselves as well. The bad point is, if you're constantly trying to please others, it can lead to depression and loss of self-esteem. Number 2. Try and force reality to change. This is similar to fight we saw earlier, but here you're making a conscious effort to try and change things. This isn't a common response. You start getting signatures for petitions, and rather than answering the questions correctly, you say, well, it's all unfair, and write a long essay on why standardized state testing of teenagers is a poor method of assessing intelligence and knowledge. Your examiner might agree with you, but unless your essay matches the answer sheet, you aren't going to get any marks. Instead, do well in your exams, become education minister, and then change the system. The good point is, if you're trying to change the world, it's a good way to campaign. The bad point is, save your energy until after you've passed your exams. Number 3. Change our perception. This might seem an odd choice, but if we can see taking exams as a good thing, it can be really helpful. Exams are there just to see how much we've learnt. Not ideal, but if we can see that they are a means of getting on in life, we can feel more positive. The good point is, it's proven to reduce stress. The bad point is, it takes time and practice. You still have to pass. No point just feeling good about exams and not putting in the revision. Number 4. Accept reality for what it is. This is similar to the previous one, but whereas changing our perception there's a risk that we don't take exams seriously, here we do. Exams and revision won't last forever. Getting good at them is a useful skill to learn at your age. Accept that exams can be stressful at times. Focus on doing good revision in plenty of time. Learn some techniques to just help you feel calm on the day and try and do the best as you can. The good point is, helps you to get good grades. The bad point is, like the previous example, it takes time to change your thinking. One of the big issues facing us today is COVID-19 and lockdown. At the beginning of March 2020, life made as much sense as it normally does, and then everything changed. Something that was only distant in China suddenly affected all of us. Our news was filled with people wearing full protective gear. Initially, we had to get used to the new guidance, which seemed to change at short notice. And those unlucky not to get a haircut before all the shops shut faced the happy prospect of their parents having a go. 2021 started with no clear sign of the situation changing. Before we look at what might be helpful, let's look at what has been lost. Teenage years can be very emotionally challenging, so it's important that there are things that can be counted upon to remain the same. School terms give a structure. During the week, you're likely to get up at the same time, go through a similar morning routine, get on a bus, walk, go by car to get to school, and arrive in time for registration. You'll meet your friends and have a set timetable of lessons. A lot of your lives will be predictable in advance. There is a clear division between home, going to and from school, and being at school. So what are some basic tips to help you get through this time? Structure. It's good to try and have a structure to your day even if you think you don't need it. Getting up at the same time, getting washed and dressed and having an overall the same morning routine each weekday can help you keep some sense of normality. Maintain a good sleep pattern, so going to bed at the same time to give between 8 to 10 hours sleep a night is very important. Supportive. Remember your friends, families, parents and teachers are also having to cope with the situation. Some of them might be finding it harder than you. Try and realise that they need support too and ask about their needs. Surprise. People are using this time to get involved in new hobbies, walk the dog, learn a musical instrument, or develop new skills that you wouldn't have been able to do before. You might be surprised what you're capable of. Maybe you take on some extra chores at home, such as helping with the washing up. It might be a shock to a couple of you that dirty clothes lying on the floor don't just magically get washed and return neatly ironed to the drawers by some mysterious force. I'm sure most of you are very good with helping out at home, but it doesn't hurt to ask. Speak. With parents and siblings all working at home, it can be very easy just to lock yourself away. Having space is important for all of us at times, but your parents will want to know how you're getting on, so try and make time each day to have a chat. If you're struggling, make sure you ask for help. Let's recap again. We have a set of rules that make sense of the world. If the world is or appears to be the same as our rules say it should be, then we feel okay. When they're not balanced, we feel stressed. Hence, when we face a difficult situation, we have several choices. Go with our gut instinct, challenge the situation looking for change our perception of it, as with the example of the roller coaster, our brains can be fooled into thinking something is less stressful when we tell it we're excited, or we can develop new skills to cope with it. Here are some ways to help on mental health. Don't do too much. Some people like to fill their days with activities, some people don't. If you're feeling overwhelmed by things, think through what is important and what could be left for another time. Make sure you prioritize the right things. Homework, yes. TikTok videos, less so. Eat and sleep well. Poor sleep patterns and poor mental health go together. Having a good diet and a regular routine which includes getting the right amount of sleep can make a big difference to how we're feeling. Keep active. Exercise, or even just going outside for a walk, can help us feel refreshed, and sometimes it helps put problems into perspective. Plan your time well, look forward to a reward. If you've got something you need to do and you're not looking forward to doing it, plan yourself a treat when it's done. But don't have the treat then try and do the task. So do your homework first and then play on your PS5 or watch that YouTube video, not the other way around. Take a break. Sometimes if you've been working for a few hours, you just need a few minutes doing something else. Have a cup of tea or a glass of water, then you might feel more refreshed. Accept who we are and be able to laugh at ourselves. We're never going to be good at everything, so enjoy your strengths. Try and improve on your weaknesses, and if you make a mistake, accept that sometimes things aren't perfect. Ask for help and keep in touch. This is very important. We can be bad at asking for help, but help is often available. Don't struggle and not tell anyone. Have a long-term view of things. We can get very bogged down with lots of stressful situations. Ask yourself, is this something that will bother me in 10 years' time? If it's not, then try and not let it get the better of you. Let's do a final recap. Our brains are good at interpreting the world and keeping us safe, but it can make the wrong assumptions. We can choose to pick better options. Stress is part of life and can get us motivated. Some stress is healthy, but only when we feel overwhelmed is it unhealthy. We can worry about our future, but how realistic are our fears? Planning and being organised can help reduce the stress. Having a structure to the day can help us feel more in control. Overall, there's a lot we can do to improve our mental health.